or variation on. I obviously have a very strong opinion about the two candidates who are running here. One is very positive, and one is not so much. And I think you will just hear any further questions that are directed to this subject. I think you'll hear pretty much variations on the same thing. What I can say is this is serious business, and the person who is in the Oval Office and who our Secretary of Defense and our Joint Chiefs of Staff and our outstanding men and women in uniform report to. They are counting on somebody who has the temperament and good judgment to be able to make decisions to keep America safe. And that should be very much on the minds of voters when they go into the voting booth in November. In terms of the threat that ISIL poses to the homeland, I think it is serious. We take it seriously. And as I said earlier, precisely because they've seen the degree of attention they can get with smaller scale attacks using small arms or assault rifles, or in the case of Nice, France, a truck. The possibility of either a lone actor or a small cell carrying out an attack that kills people is real. And that's why our intelligence and law enforcement and military officials are working around the clock to try to anticipate potential attacks, to obtain the threads of people who might be vulnerable to brainwashing by ISIL. We are constrained here in the United States to carry out this work in a way that's consistent with our laws and presumptions of innocence. And the fact that we prevent a lot of these attacks as effectively as we do, without a lot of fanfare and abiding by our law, is a testament to the incredible work that these folks are doing. They work really hard at it, but it is always a risk. And some of you may have read the article in the New York Times today. I guess it came out last night online, about this individual in Germany who had confessed and given himself up, and then explained his knowledge of how ISIS networks worked. There was a paragraph in there that some may have caught, which we don't know, for a fact that this is true, but according to this reporting, the individual indicated that ISIL recognizes it's harder to get its operatives into the United States. But the fact that we have what he referred to as open gun laws meant that anybody, as long as they didn't have a criminal record that barred them from purchase, could go in and buy weapons. That made sort of a homegrown extremist strategy more attractive to them. And those are the hardest to stop, because by definition, if somebody doesn't have a record, if it's not triggering something, it means that anticipating their actions becomes that much more difficult. And this is why the military strategy that we have in Syria and Iraq is necessary, but it is not sufficient. We have to do a better job of disrupting networks.
Amen.
And those networks are more active in Europe than they are here, but we don't know what we don't know, and so it's conceivable that there are some networks here that could be activated. But we also have to get to the messaging that can reach a troubled individual over the internet, and do a better job of disrupting that. And what I've told my team is that although we've been working on this now for 5, 6, 7 years, we've got to put more resources into it. Can't be an afterthought. It's something that we have to really focus on. This is also why how we work with the Muslim American community, the values that we affirm about their patriotism and their sacrifice, and our fellow feeling with them is so important. One of the reasons that we don't have networks and cells that are as active here as they are in certain parts of Europe is because the Muslim American community in this country is extraordinarily patriotic and largely successful, and fights in our military and serves as our doctors and our nurses, and there are communities in which they are raising their kids with love of country and a rejection of violence, and that has to be affirmed consistently. And if we screw that up, then we're going to have bigger problems. Gregory Corti of USA Today.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yesterday, you commuted the sentences of 214 federal inmates. It was the largest single-day grant of commutations in the history of the American presidency. So I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about your clemency thought process. One is, you've talked about this as low-level drug offenders who got mandatory minimum sentences. But about a quarter of the commutations you've granted also had firearms offenses. Given your overall philosophy on firearms, can you reconcile that for us? And given that previously in your presidency you had sent a memo to the Office of Pardon Attorney saying there was a sort of a predisposition against firearms being carried in clemency, why did you change your mind on that? Also, the other side of the ledger here is pardons. You've granted more commutations than any president since Calvin Coolidge. You've granted fewer pardons than any two-term president since John Adams. Why is that? Is the focus on commutations taking energy away from pardons? Especially since these are you've talked about second chances. A full pardon would give people a better chance at those second chances. And then finally, just one other thing on pardons. Many of your predecessors in the final days of their presidency have reserved that for their more politically sensitive pardons. Should we expect you to do that, or would you rule that out?
I appreciate the question, Gregory, because I haven't had a chance to talk about this much, and this is an effort that I'm really proud of. It is my view, shared by Democrats and Republicans alike in many quarters, that as successful as we've been in reducing crime in this country, the extraordinary rate of incarceration of nonviolent offenders has created its own set of problems that are devastating. Entire communities have been ravaged, where largely men, but some women, are taken out of those communities. Kids are now growing up without parents. It perpetuates a cycle of poverty and disorder in their lives. It is disproportionately young men of color that are being arrested at higher rates, charged and convicted at higher rates, and imprisoned for longer sentences. And so ultimately, the fix on this is criminal justice reform, and I still hold out hope that the bipartisan effort that's taken place in Congress can finish the job, and we can have a criminal justice system, at least at the federal level, that is both smart on crime, effective on crime, but recognizes the need for proportionality in sentencing and the need to rehabilitate those who commit crimes. But even as that slow process of criminal justice reform goes forward, what I wanted to see is if we could reinvigorate the pardon process and commutation process that had become stalled over the course of several years.
Thanks for watching.
Because it's politically risky. You know, you commute somebody and they commit a crime, and you know the politics of it are tough, and everybody remembers the Willie Horton name. And so the bias, I think, of my predecessors, and frankly, a number of my advisors early in my presidency, is be careful about that.